Well, let's talk a little about irrigation management, because that's one of the reasons why we're on this farm here today. And so there's ponding issues here.
Yes.
As you can see in some of the areas around this farm, and even though we've applied a fair amount of gypsum and compost at the beginning of the season, is something that this particular soil is constantly fighting, is that closing back up of the soil.
Yeah, so we did make a fall application, winter application, and with that, the grower has been able to put on additional hours of irrigation, 24 hours, 36 hours, without having a bad ponding problem. Whereas in the past, a 12-hour irrigation event would have caused great amount of ponding throughout. And that's just not good at all for the trees.
So that's one of the things we obviously do when we're driving around and consulting and talking to our farmers. When we see pooling and ponding, which is an often issue in these clay loam soils, is making sure we're having the application gypsum at the right times to help have that clay fluctuated.
Yes.
And the water penetrate down so it's not sitting ponding. And can you talk a little bit about the effects of what happens if you have a lot of ponding there on top of the soil?
Well, you're not going to have any oxygen available to the tree. So it's really going to shut down on all growth aspects. Nutrition is not going to be available.
Right.
Additionally, you're setting yourself up for a host of disease problems when you have ponding like that.
Fascinating. So in here, again, thinking about the beginning of our conversation, and you just never know. We always want to prepare, especially in a drought year, for what could be a usually hot summer, but this year, potentially even a hotter summer if we're talking about trying to have the equal balance of those heat units. Solving that ponding issue is even more important, because when the grower irrigates, they want that water in there on those roots, supplying what that plant needs and not sitting on top of the ground.
Right. Water sitting on top of the ground is doing nobody any good. It's not doing the tree good. It's not doing the grower good. It's actually pretty counterproductive.
Sure.
I worry about the disease complex, but being an agronomist, I worry about the nutrition in the trees when I see that, because the trees just shut down.
Right.
Without oxygen.
Right. And in this instance, if I remember you mentioning correctly, historically they had only pretty much run solution grade gypsum through their drip system. Is that right?
Right, yeah, which I'm a big fan of. I love solution grade. But in this instant, the solution grade materials could not apply enough calcium sulfate to overcome this great soil need on this particular block. Because
of that heavy clay, there wasn't enough gypsum that could get to the drip irrigation system to penetrate and fluctuate that soil.
Right.
And so
it did its job.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong. It just was too little.
Right.
To overcome this particular problem.
And so we solved that this last season by a
3-ton application of Holloway 55%.
And so that 3-ton application allowed enough of that coverage around the root base in order to really solve these ponding problems. Yeah. And now you mentioned they can almost double the irrigation.
Oh yeah, double or triple.
Wow.
And to make us feel better, this particular client has irrigation technology.
Right.
And they're able to watch their water move through the profile at greater depths than they've ever seen.
Interesting.
So it's working very nicely.
It's doing exactly what they're working.
Yes.
And so along with that 3-ton of gypsum application, we also did some other broad amendments applied at that time too, is that right?
Yeah, we used compost, dairy compost. We blended that with some potassium products. And I think that's actually really helped the whole soil profile too. It really livens up these soils, gets the microbes going again, and lets the tree do its thing.
So that's a really interesting point, and something that I know that we had talked about as we were arriving on the ranch here. You had mentioned that you've been looking at what the nitrogen needs would be for this particular orchard, and we're thinking about the effect of that compost. And when you think compost, you don't always think nitrogen reduction, although there is obviously a play in there with putting on compost. Obviously the organic matter is the main reason why we put on compost, to get those organisms, eating and getting that soil lively and getting those gases released to the roots. But talk a little bit about the findings you've had here by that 5-ton application of compost.
Yeah, so that's a funny topic, because I've always said that if you're buying compost for the NP and K in it, you're dumb.
Right.
This year, with nitrogen prices being so high,
ridiculous and hard to get.
Yeah, and we started really looking at those numbers. In fact, I did a cost analysis where I determined that the price of nitrate nitrogen in compost was about 50% less than something like UN32.
Wow. So where current prices are, because access to nitrogen is harder, it's more expensive, and so the effective compost has helped counterbalance that in this instance.
Yeah. In this particular instance, I took the normal April 1st tissue sample, and it came back very, very high in nitrogen, higher than I would have expected.
Fascinating.
But because of this weather condition we're seeing, I didn't believe the tissue samples. They just didn't make sense. They weren't normal.
And you pulled that sample when?
April 1st.
April 1st, okay.
So I just wasn't comfortable with making that decision. So I came in again in May 1st,
right,
and pulled another sample, which is very atypical. But I wanted to prove to myself that we needed this additional nitrogen. Lo and behold, it came back high again.
Interesting.
And talking with the grower managers, we've elected not to put additional nitrogen on. Now, I hope I'm not wrong
Sure.
and look foolish in July, but we have two good data sets and a very mature crop, so
right,
the demand is actually going down at this point. So we've elected to leave the UN32 in the tank.
Wow, amazing. So being able to save money on UN32 so far, we'll see how that looks at the end of the year. And the impetus is still yet to be known, but your suspicion is that the compost was not only helping put nitrogen back on the soil, but also the gypsum plus the compost opening up the soil and releasing the nitrogen that's already there, making it more available to the plant. Is that
with the more precise irrigation from the gypsum, the tree has a better ability to forage, and get other nitrogen that may have already been there from previous years.
So utilizing these valuable nutrients that are often already found in our soil, bound up for various reasons. Sometimes it's pH, sometimes it's salts, sometimes it's a lack of access to or ponding, which hurts the ability for the gases to be released and the roots to be able to grab the things it wants to grab. There's various things that prevent the roots from actually grabbing those nutrients that are readily available in our soil. So instead of pounding more of these nutrients in our soil, just make it more available.
Utilization of what we already have.
Right, which is way more efficient, sustainable, and from a budgetary standpoint, makes a grower look really smart at the end of the year.
Right. Well, and not only did we save money, but we have one heck of a crop here.
I mean, this crop looks beautiful. If you pan around here, and these trees, it's going to be another massive crop this year coming for this grower, which is fantastic to see. Well, Steve, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming out to one of the, this orchard that our full agronomy program services, you and your team services. It looks like some fantastic work that's happening here. Obviously, still some more time ahead of us to see how this orchard turns out, but I know you and your team will be on it, managing it, looking at it, whatever the weather, whatever the circumstances bring forth. There's so many solutions that sit in the soil, and what I love about your team and your approach is that it's just about maximizing that efficiency to grab what's there in order to use it for the benefit of the tree and the grower.
Absolutely. Things change daily out here. We have to be on our toes to not only predict, but see all these new things that happen in the agronomy world. And that's what we do out here.
Love it. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for meeting me out here.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.